Welcome to Driven by Dreams. Today's guest is Natalia Tafur, the founder and chief researcher of Keyhole Research and Consulting, where she digs deep to uncover the why behind what people do, think, and buy. With a multicultural background and a passion for lifelong learning, she brings a global lens to consumer and market research. From macro trends to micro insights, Natalia turns data into stories that drive action. Let's dive into her journey and learn how to cut through the noise and truly understand people. Hi, Natalia. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Anishka. Thanks for inviting me.
So, before we get started, I'd love to learn more about you. So, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions and just
Okay,
answer with the first thing that comes to mind.
I will.
Okay, what's one word that describes your entrepreneurial journey so far?
Ooh, I would say exploration.
Morning person or night owl?
Both morning for work, evening for guilty pleasures, and binge watching TV.
What's a business tool or app that you can't live without?
Mm. So many. Tough question. I would say Canva. I love Canva.
What's your go to way to recharge?
Definitely staying active. I love pickleball. I love reformer Pilates, and I love just walking along the water and chit chatting with a friend.
One place in the world that has changed your perspective?
Ooh, Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I had to go live when I was 10 years old.
Wow. If you weren't doing this, what career would you try next?
I don't know. I don't know if I'd call it a career, but if I went back to get another degree, I'd probably do something like cultural anthropology, something like that.
What's the best advice you've received in one sentence?
Ooh. It was from my dad, and I was having a tough time in college, and he said, "Don't take it personally." And whenever I have those thoughts, I always think of him.
What's something people always get wrong about your work?
Ooh, I guess it depends what people you're talking about. Most people don't even understand what I do. So I just say, those focus groups you see on commercials? I lead those discussions.
Well, for those watching, could you go into what you do and about your business?
Sure, sure. About 6 years ago, I started my business, my firm called Keyhole Research and Consulting. It's a boutique market research firm. We really focus on qualitative research methods. Sometimes we do some quantitative as well if it's married with the qualitative. Now, those are some big fancy words, but again, things like focus groups are an excellent example of what qualitative market research is. That's, a live version, there's asynchronous versions, there's all different types of qualitative research. And I got my beginnings, though, spending about 18 years inside the automotive industry. It was a great learning place, playground for learning, if you will, to kind of get not only knowledge about that industry, which is an industry I still focus on today, but also I transitioned internally into the insights division. We called it market intelligence at my employer. Sometimes it's consumer insights. And luckily, I got a lot of training there, including moderation training. And that is really what gave me the basic skills to do what I do and take it out on my own.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So you mentioned you're proud of constantly evolving. How do you know when it's time to pivot in your business?
Mm. I would like to say that pivoting is not necessarily, one point in time like a milestone. I like to think that I micro pivot every month, right? I need to look back what worked well, what projects worked well, what did I learn and what didn't. So there's a little bit of hindsight and looking at that, but also a little bit of foresight. What's on the horizon? Is this going to continue working? Are there things coming my way? So I think every month or so, maybe quarterly, depending on your business, you need to do those micro pivots, right? And so I don't think it's, I woke up one day and had an epiphany type of thing, at least not for me. It's really about making these fine-tuned, changes in your business and mentality as well.
You mentioned your entrepreneurial journey was like an exploration. Do you,
Mhm.
do you ever get tired of it?
I don't think so. You need to keep it fresh and funky, and, that's where the evolution comes, but I think it's really important to stay engaged with other people, especially if you're a solopreneur. It can be lonely, right, if you're not engaging with other people. So I find it very important to, um, you know, keep it fresh and learn. There's a lot of programming in the different communities. I'm in one big community here in San Diego that's very cross-functional, and so I learn from that group. There's a lot of programming, like I talked about. I also belong to a professional organization, and they're also like my colleagues, but they're spread really not only throughout the country, throughout the world, and we talk about more relevant things in my field. So between those two things, I feel like I have it covered a lot, but I also stay in touch with my alumni group. So just staying plugged in with what's going on, and staying abreast. And that's how you kind of keep it fresh and not boring, and, keeping a pulse on what's going on.
What
Yeah.
was the biggest mindset shift you had to make when moving from employee to entrepreneur?
Ooh, that's very good. You have to be much more strategic because it's not just showing up for work and you let someone else make those strategic decisions. But really, a lot of it is, what are your priorities? Do you have kind of that big goal that you're going for in 5 years? What are you doing to get to that goal? And kind of these daily decisions. Am I going to spend my time today working on a project that I know I'm going to get paid for in a month, which you need to pay the bills, so that's important. But also, you have to do things where the payout is going to be longer term, right? So, I'm investing in my website. I'm investing in relationships, client relationships. I'm taking someone to lunch. I'm talking. I'm connecting. I won't see a paycheck in a month for that, but I could see a paycheck, 5 years from now, or sometimes a month, sometimes 6 months from now. So you have to really learn how to prioritize your time. Or there's things like, if I don't do my bookkeeping this month, will that actually take away from my income? So kind of understanding priorities and staying on top of that. I think that's really important because it's a lot more than just showing up to work every day.
You mentioned that you're also your own C-suite, so that sounds empowering, but also really challenging. How do you manage wearing so many hats?
Yeah. So a lot of it is fun because when I was hired to do a position, it was very, this is your job and these are your roles and responsibilities. I'm a Gemini. I love getting my hands in a lot of different things. So if I can flex my creative hat and get more visual, I love that. That's kind of the creative side. I like marketing. I like things like that. So kind of I'm able to dabble in a lot more things, which keeps me a little, can be distracting too. But you also have to have this keen sense of self-awareness. What am I not good at? Because whatever I'm not good at, not only do I not like it, but I'm probably not good at it and I'm wasting a lot of time doing it. So you really have to know when to outsource things. I have a CPA, for example. I don't want to do my taxes, right? I would probably spend a month trying to do my taxes and it'd probably come out wrong. So I'm smart enough to know, okay, that's something that I need to hire a professional to do. So, if someone can do something even 60% as good as you, 70%, sometimes it's worth offloading that. So having, again, a sense of self-awareness, I think, is super important.
What's one recent lesson that came from a failure or misstep in your business?
Ooh, I would say, there have been maybe 2 or 3 projects in the last 2 years that really went off the rails. And, I got through them somehow. Most of them I got through. And, one of them I even had to stop. I actually had to cancel the project because I couldn't even, manage the situation anymore. So that was a big wow. I mean, if I'm saying no to people who want to give me money, it had to be pretty bad. So after those projects, I tend to look back. What went right? What went wrong? What was I accountable for? What could I have done differently? So I think you constantly need to be doing that analysis. And, there are things I was like, maybe when I kick off projects, I need to be clearer about what my boundaries are, what the expectations are, how I want to deal with these clients. I learned that when the client team is too big and they don't have kind of a designated decision maker, that can cause a lot of trouble. So there's little things that you go learning along the way, right? Next time, I'm never going to do that. Or maybe it's payment terms. Like, I'm never going to sign up for a project where I have to put that much capital up front again. So, again, micro lessons, but I think it's always important to have a little bit of hindsight. Where could I have done it differently and better so that you can just constantly be improving?
In today's day, a lot of people's research comes from AI tools like ChatGPT. So,
Mhm.
what advice do you have for people, anyone, not just entrepreneurs, to effectively research?
I think the number one thing people lose sight of, and I think this goes for anything in life, is really what is the objective, okay? And how are all these things that you are doing feed or ladder up into that objective? If you're just kind of putting filler in things, that's not gonna help you do it. So it's almost like an iPhone, it's kind of less is more, and how can you achieve that objective with the least amount? And that takes more thought, right? So, when we used to do, work with students, college actually people who are getting their MBA, and they were creating a survey, and they just wanted to put hundreds of questions into this survey. I think you have to be very thoughtful. When you put a question into a survey or you're asking a question in a focus group, you have to have the forethought of saying, what are some potential answers and how is that going to serve me? If it's not going to serve you, don't ask the question just to feel good or to look smart. It's not about you, it's about what you're going to get out of it. So I think less is more is something hard. It's hard to do and it's hard to teach, but I think it's important and you have to be thoughtful about what you do.
So, what are some of the tools you use for researching?
Yeah. So for research, tools. Of course I use AI. But I think it's important on how you use AI, right? So if I'm developing a discussion guide, if I'm you know, even simple little questions last or about 2 weeks ago I was going to be showing 6 different images during a focus group and I needed to label them with letters, right? But I didn't want the letters to create bias. I didn't want the letters to sound like each other. I didn't, there were certain criteria. I didn't want A or B because that would create bias because it's at the beginning of the alphabet. Now, could I have sat there and gone through the alphabet and found those letters? Yeah, but it probably would have taken me 15 minutes just to make sure I got a nice, spread of letters. And then I had to create different rotations. This is something that ChatGPT did for me, or any other AI, generative AI tool, did for me in less than 60 seconds. So I just got a net gain of, you know, whatever minutes. I'll let you do the math on that. I'm a qualitative researcher, but those are just little time saves. Also, when you're a solopreneur, I loved prompt engineering, so I will ask it to act like an expert qualitative researcher, right? So it's almost like I have a little bit of a colleague there. Now, am I making huge decisions from AI? No, I don't have that trust level yet, but there are small little lifts where I can save 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe an hour if I just ask it a few good questions. And, sometimes I'll want to almost try out or rehearse some questions I'm going to ask. What am I not thinking about when I'm asking this about, a topic? So there are little lifts there. That's on the front end when I'm designing research. On the back end, I do use some AI tools to help me, with transcription of focus groups, identifying who's speaking, and just, doing a lot of segmentation. This person owns a minivan, but this person owns a sports car. How are their views different? Again, I don't put all of my faith in there. A lot of times when I'm doing the analysis, I will do it 100% without AI, and I do it as more of a validation tool. So I am using AI, but I think I'm doing it in a thoughtful and cautious way.
You mentioned prompt engineering. So, what are the few things you do to write a prompt that will give you the most out of it? So, less is more, right?
Yes, yes. So I always start with how I want it to act. Do I want it to act as my son's eighth grade science teacher, if I'm helping him with homework? Or do I want it to act as an expert qualitative researcher in a specific industry, which I might be studying at that time? So I always tell it how to act. I give it some context about what I'm trying to accomplish or the situation I'm in. Then I give it the task I want it to do, how I want it laid out. Is it a table? Is it a bullet? Is it an image? Images don't usually pan out the way I want them to. And then I always ask it to ask me clarifying questions. Because even when you're like, oh, there's no possible question I didn't answer, it will come back with 5 additional questions. I'm like, you know what? That's pretty good that you asked me that. So I always ask it to ask me clarifying questions. And then again, it's an iterative process. So I say, that's great. Now I actually want you to focus a little bit more there or consider this. So I spend a little bit of time just kind of going through that iterative clarifying process. So that's how I typically like to use my chat GPT or similar tools.
Well, in today's data heavy world, how do you balance qualitative insight with quantitative findings?
hmm Well, luckily, I'm a qualitative expert, so I don't deal too much in quantitative, but I do dabble in it. I enjoy kind of finding the story in the numbers, but I'm a firm believer that the best research is when they're married, right? In quantitative, you are using huge amounts of data, which can be hard to get through. And sometimes you have AI tools, other tools that help you sift through that. Um, in qualitative, I think the struggle is that there's not a big sample size. You're working with maybe 20 people you interviewed. If you're lucky, maybe there's 50 people you interviewed. So you really have to have this insight in terms of, um, you know, what they're saying, which things are important, which ones are outliers. So it's really managing that. And then, clients I want, significantly, statistically significant turnaround and or results. And you have to explain this is qualitative research. And that's why it's nice to marry the two, because when this one syncs up with this one, then your life is easy. When the qualitative and the quantitative don't match up, you might have to do some further analysis about why. Was my recruiting method different? Was I talking to a different group of people? So it's a constant negotiation, but I really like to be able to use both to really tell the big picture story of what's going on. We also have a really big problem right now with in quantitative with kind of fake respondents. Big problem. I'm not entrenched in that too much, but I have colleagues that are, so that's a really big problem. With qualitative, you have fake respondents, or we call them professional respondents, who will just say yes to anything and try to get into studies for money. And you need to have an amazing recruiter that can see through the BS with those people. You're not always going to be able to weed them out 100%, but you do need to kind of take precautions there.
You mentioned how bias can shape the way we choose something or interpret something. So, how does generational or cultural lenses shape the way we interpret market data?
hmm A lot. People don't like labels these days, especially younger generations, maybe even your generation, Anishka. So we have to be careful about how we make generalizations and stereotypes. But I think again, it comes back to self-awareness. Like, who am I in relation to other things and vice versa? So, especially I can speak a lot to the cultural lens because I've lived in other cultures. You may have experienced different cultures yourself, and you realize that perspective and empathy is so important. If you don't have exposure to other things and other ways of life, you can't understand. So if you've only been rich all your life, you can't understand what it's like to be poor. I've lived kind of in both worlds or on the fringes of both. It really opens your eyes to what people are going through. Same culturally. I lived abroad when the US was entering wars. That looks a lot different from abroad than it does in the States. So I think, it's really important to get that exposure. Your audience isn't always going to have that. So it's important to, especially for my clients, that I help them understand the journey of their consumers because they don't live it, right? Especially, I worked with car designers. They are very advanced. They have very unique perspectives, which is great because that gets us very interesting designs. Most people are much more hoi polloi and have, very average lives. So there's a big disconnect sometimes in that mindset. So I'm kind of the interpreter or the translator trying to connect the dots and say, hey, you're here, they're here, but you need to understand where they're coming from. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that did. Thank you. You mentioned that when you went to Argentina, that really opened your eyes
Mm.
and it brought a new perspective. Could you please share more about that?
Sure. So I was 10 years old when I went. I did not speak Spanish, even though I had been exposed to it throughout my life because of where my father's family comes from, where I was born. But, learning a new language, just even like grammar, right? How sentences are constructed, how verb tenses change, even these little things that you're like, oh, that's just school stuff, really is eye opening. So to go through it, now I have an incredible sense of empathy for anyone who has to learn English. And I've been an English teacher, and I think that's what made me a better English teacher, actually. So I've been in their shoes learning another language. But also, I moved there in the 80s. There was no internet. I mean, they didn't even have fax. I think they had something called like, telex, you know what I mean? We had other, strange ways of communicating. This is way before it was cool to go backpacking in South America. So really, if I saw other Americans, it was because I went to school with them or they were living there like me. So really to be kind of in this foreign land, it felt like moving to another planet, really. Very eye-opening. And to do that during your formative years when you're still kind of developing a sense of who you are is transformational. I would be it's called third culture kids. So you live in another culture, and then coming back is extremely difficult. But it's amazing. You make amazing bonds. I'm still friends with a lot of the expats that live there, whether they're American or from other countries. So really getting that global perspective at such a young age was found, completely changed my fabric of who I am.
I've never lived anywhere other than San Diego, but I'm currently learning Spanish right now, so it's cool.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, it's hard.
It
I've
is.
learned I've learned Hindi too, but like reading and writing it was a bit harder for me. I've grown up speaking it with my family, but when you read it and you write it, it's like completely different.
Yeah, but it's great. I mean, even traveling, even not everyone has the opportunity to live abroad, but pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, learning a new language, traveling, all these things are really pushing what you know, right? If you get complacent, I think that's where things really, really end.
Well, thank you so much, Natalia. I think I've really enjoyed our conversation. Do you have any final words of wisdom before we wrap this up?
Ooh, I think, it's just if you are thinking about being an entrepreneurship, and Anishka, I think we spoke about this briefly before as well. It's really, you have to be confident. And sometimes you might doubt yourself. Like, am I confident enough to do this? But I really feel that you need to pretend that you're confident. And if you can do that, you can pull it off. You really can. So I think you just need to believe in yourself. And, if I could tell myself something when I was younger, maybe even in middle school, I would just say, Natalia, you've got this, girl. You go all the way. You go as far as you can. So, really kind of releasing that self-doubt into the ether and embracing yourself and just going for it. Fail fast, take risks. What's there to lose?
Well, thank you so much, Natalia. That's great advice. And I've really
Thank
enjoyed speaking with you.
Best of luck to you. I want you've got this, girl. So you go and conquer the world, okay?
Thank you.